How's it going? So, super quick video. I made an update to Triforce, which is um, decision making mostly. So, decision making tools. I added decision making traps, so you can find them in here. It's just that untrained humans who are not aware of them, they fall into them a lot of the times, and then that can cause a lot of, I call them bugs or incorrect behaviors that can get you into sticky situations. So it's important to be aware of them so you can then reflect and say, oh, I could be like, well, what's the good way? I think like that, or it makes sense to me because of this trap, decision making trap. Do you know what I mean? Now, normally, don't really want, I didn't really want to go into that many details, but because in theory, if you just use this tool here, in theory, that's kind of all you need, because naturally, you should evolve into making correct decisions. But if you're kind of interested, it's a good idea to know them. So yeah, so I added this, and I also added make sure your beliefs are correct, which is the two videos I made about making sure that when you believe in something or you think that something is true, make sure you test it to make sure that it's true. Because a lot of the times, if you are kind of operating, I'll give you a silly example, right? When I was in high school, some girls, they if they like a boy, right? They tend to be very sometimes hostile and critical of that person, right? But from the boy's perspective, he can say, "Oh, he assumes that she doesn't like him." Do you know what I mean? So she could be like around him all the time, but because she's hostile, he thinks she doesn't like him. So he's assuming. So in those situations, it's a good idea to ask friends. What does she think? Blah blah blah. It's a silly example. Another one example would be they're high. I covered this in here. It's called heistics. They happen a lot of the times. Heistics. It's like, okay, if price is low, that means bad quality, or if price is high, it means good quality. If it's German, it's good quality. If it's Chinese, it's bad quality. If a person does not speak English really well, that means he's uneducated. That's another heuristic. Does that make sense? Or if a person is well dressed, or a person is very beautiful, that means they are successful, or that everything they say is true. So there are a lot of kind of like these little mental shortcuts that just can screw you over in life. So I listed all of them. I would suggest you just go through and research them. One of them is I discovered recently. I didn't know that it existed actually. It's called agency detection. So basically, humans. So what does it do? Humans have a tendency to assign that something, like, let's say event happens, let's say throw of a dice happens, it's completely random, we don't know why 6 appeared on the dice or whatever 3 appeared, but on average humans will say, oh, it's God who's doing it, or some kind of celestial spiritual being. So why is that happening? That's because from evolutionary perspective, just read this stuff, right? Let's say we have some kind of event. Well, the easiest way to example is, let's say we have a very high cornfield, right? So the cornfield moves. There are two ways you can, when you don't know what's happening, you don't know why it's moving, so there is two assumptions you can make, like, just for simple purposes. You can say, okay, wind is doing the movement, or you can say it's either some kind of spiritual being, or it's some kind of a predator trying to eat me, right? So one is positive, one is negative. The person who assumed that it was the wind went to check it out and found it was a predator and got eaten, right? So a lot of people who made that positive assumption got eaten by predators, or they died, or there was like some kind of an ambush, right? Now, the negative assumption is, okay, there has to be a predator or something moving it, right? You take a rifle, you take a gun, you move in, boom, you get ambushed, you have a rifle, you survive. So there were more kids made because you survived. There were more offsprings from the branch that assumed negatively. Does that make sense? So it's evolutionarily profitable for you to always assume that there is something causing it. Does that make sense? I don't know. It's very hard to understand, but just kind of let me just draw it one sec. Okay, so I kind of drew it. So you see, like, we have two branches of now, because there in evolution there can be two kind of, there can be evolutionary traits, which is bigger muscles, but there are also brain evolution in terms of like, I'm not gonna, I don't want to go, because that's like, we're talking 40 hours, right? Like, there is also evolutionary behaviors that are baked into you that you do because it's profitable to do them. Does that make sense? They're kind of like some birds in some kind of they have very long beaks, so they can pick out ants. So that's evolutionary trait. So not all birds have big beaks, but this one has. So it's evolutionary profitable for you to have very long beak because it can pick out ants, right? So that's a physical trait, right? So lions, they have big claws, right? So the bigger the claws, the stronger they are. Or muscles, right? The bigger the muscles, the more likely you are to kill other predators. Therefore, the bigger the muscles, the better, right? It's kind of like very oversimplified, but it's the same with the brain, right? So in here we have evolution of the brain. So we have two assumptions. One said, okay, wind caused it, it's nothing to worry about. They go check it out, they get killed, right? So let's say 50% of the times they get killed. So it's a coin flip. So there's gonna be less kids in here. Now, these guys always assumed negative. So they go and they check it out. 90% of the time they can survive because they are prepared. But, of course, occasionally it still happens, they still get killed, right? So there will be more kids in here. So this will be passed over in evolution as a trait that is profitable for survivability. It's profitable to think negative, and it's profitable to assume that someone is doing it. Okay? I hope it makes sense. So if you read it, so therefore, most people will think that, oh, someone is always doing it, right? I don't know, there is a tree, it's too old, a branch falls, okay, someone is trying to climb the tree and kill me. Is profitable to assume, profitable, because you will be on a guard in case you are wrong. Because if you're wrong and there is in fact some predator climbing the tree, you will just die. So that's why people think that sometimes people assign agency where it doesn't exist. Like a good example would be, let's say you throw a dice, I think I said, and like, okay, what causes the dice? Oh, it's random. But who controls the randomness? Most people will tell you, oh, it's some kind of god or some kind of celestial being or something, okay? Because it's profitable to do that. Right? So that's why it's important to kind of always analyze your assumptions to make sure that you don't fall into it. Because you can sometimes blame somebody for something that they didn't do. Or you can assume that, oh my god, something happened to me, and that was somebody else's fault, but it's not. You know? So you can get yourself into sticky situations by this type of traps, do you know what I mean? So the rest of them are kind of covered, so some of them, like, I would really advise you to research them. Kind of just, if you Google them, you'll be able to find them. So, because some of my explanation doesn't always make sense. Like, especially this one's very hard to understand. Some costs. So that's why I didn't want to try to explain it, because you need to read a lot of different angles, different type of examples, and one of them will eventually make sense to you, and it will get wired into your head. You'll be like, oh, yeah, okay, I understand how it works, I understand why it's not a good thing to fall into this trap of sunk costs. Okay, take care, bye-bye.